Now in this video, we're going to talk about how to leverage the strengths of both Dynamesh and subdivision sculpting. Now, you should have already seen the Dynamesh video at this point, and you understand that a Dynamesh mesh does not have subdivision levels. If we switch to our Dynamesh version of this character bust here and go into frame mode, you see it's all very, very tightly clustered quads that have just basically been shrink wrapped in the shape of our character. There is no way to step up and down your subdivision levels, and as a result of that, we can't do things like export this to another application for animation. This is not an animatable topology. We can't easily add UVs and extract texture maps. So Dynamesh works particularly well as a design tool, as a sculpting tool inside of Zbrush. But we always want to be able to return to a subdivision model. That is a version of our character, like this here, which has multiple subdivision levels. As you can see, this is identical to the Dynamesh, but I can step up and down my subdivision levels, going to a lower level. And as you've seen in previous lessons, we want to be able to step down to our lower subdivision levels so we can do things like make big shape changes to the mesh, or most importantly, I think, pose the mesh. So for example, if I were to go to my transpose gizmo here, and then mask out the head, invert that mask, then draw a transpose line right up where the spine would be. Let's position this line, and then turn off our X symmetry. Go to rotate, and I'll just click and drag. Oops, I need to make sure that I don't have a mask on that side of the face. I'll go to the mask lasso, and then let's go ahead and unmask this bit here. There we go. Now I can click and drag the center circle, and I can pose this character. And posing is not something that you can do easily in Dynamesh. It's simply too dense of a mesh to make that possible. So if I were to clear my mask now and then step back up my subdivision levels, I have posed this head. And that's, again, not something that can be done easily in Dynamesh. So there's many, many reasons why we would want to return to our subdivision level model while maintaining all the detail and all the poly paint that we may have done in Dynamesh. So in this video, I'm going to show you the process of how we do this. To begin with, I'm going to go right here under the subtool menu. This is the subdivision version of the model. I'm going to delete it. So now we're back to just our Dynamesh. There are three subtools. There's the head, the eyes, and the teeth. We're going to focus on the head. Of course, the head is Dynameshed. It's 2 million polygons. And what we want to do is we want to copy this model. I'm going to go down here under the subtool palette, and I'm going to click duplicate. And that will make a copy of this mesh. It's right there. It's not currently visible. Now what I want to do is I want to ZRemesh this copy of the model. That's going to basically create a low polygon organized mesh that can be UV'd or animated and exported from ZBrush into Maya or 3D Studio Max or any other program of your choice. So to do that, we're going to go to the Geometry menu. Under Geometry, there's a menu called ZRemesher. In ZRemesher, I have this button here which executes ZRemesh. There's a few other options which we talk about in more depth in the chapter that specifically deals with ZRemesher, but I want to focus in on this particular process of bouncing back and forth between Dynamesh and a subdivision model. So what we need to be concerned with is our target polygon count. I'm going to leave this at 4. This is in multiples of 1,000, so this is 4,000 faces that will represent this head. I could set that a little bit lower, but this is a good kind of median range. It'll give us a nice low-resolution representation of the volumes that has a nice edge flow that we can actually utilize. So what I will do is I will press ZRemesher. There will be a status bar up here at the top of the screen while it processes the mesh, and basically ZBrush is automating a retopology. It's looking at the flow of the model, and it's looking at the target polygon count, and it says, all right, I'm going to create a 4,000 polygon mesh that most accurately represents the shape that you've given me. Placing edge loops around smart areas. It understands to edge loop around eyes and mouth. It'll edge loop down here in the hollows in the neck. It's a very, very good tool. And I've actually used it professionally to establish a base topology that I then edit further. There have been times when I've used it to generate a low-res mesh for props, and actually I've been able to use the ZRemesher mesh in a pipeline. So it's a very, very powerful tool, and it's very, very accurate. It was improved greatly in the last version of ZBrush, and that would have been ZBrush 2019. And we'll talk about that more when we talk specifically about ZRemesher. But like I said, This tutorial is just about learning how to take a Dynamesh, turn it back into a subdivision model without losing any of our sculpted form, any of our detail, and without losing polypaint. So when I ZRemesh this model, we will lose our polypaint, but remember we made a copy that still has it. So here if I go into frame mode, you see we've got a nice organized topology. Like I said, it's looped down here into the recesses. Now, I want to make something really clear. This sculpture, if we switch over to our copy that we made, let's turn on solo mode so we're just looking at it. This is asymmetrical. You see that the forms on each side are not perfectly symmetrical. So when I remesh this, it's important that I don't have X symmetry turned on. If you turn on X symmetry, it will symmetrize your low-res mesh. It will make it symmetrical on both sides, and it'll get rid of any asymmetry that you deliberately sculpted in. So that's something important to keep in mind. Now, with this low-res, this is the high-res. That is a Dynamesh that has all the polypaint still on it. That's the copy of our Dynamesh. I'm going to go back to our ZRemesher model. I'm going to go to the bottom of the subtool menu where we've got the project menu. Now I want to project geometry and I want to project color because I don't want to lose that polypaint. I'm going to press Control D. That's the hotkey to add one subdivision level. Once I've added one subdivision level, I'm going to click Project All. Now, I think it's useful to hide the eyes and the teeth so it doesn't project on anything but the head. So we're going to turn on visibility on the other head. Now, I have solo turned on, so I don't have to see that copy, but it's still there. As long as this eyeball is turned on, this mesh is going to project onto, it's going to shrink wrap itself to that copy of the Dynamesh. So watch what happens. I click Project All, and it says, do you want to project polypainting? And I want to say yes. There we go. So there's my first projection, and it's starting to pick up the color and all the detail. Obviously, it's not as good as my Dynamesh because it's not dense enough. It's only 27,000 faces, so I'll divide it again to make it 108,000 faces. And then once again, I will press Project All, and it will shrink wrap again and pick up more detail and more polypaint. Let's divide another time, going to 433,000 faces and Project All. Since it's a little bit more dense now, ZBrush has to do a bit of thinking. And there we go. So we're getting very close. What I'll do is I'll zoom in a bit, and then I'll just switch between the two heads to see if there's any difference. You see there's probably one more subdivision level worth of projection that we can do. So I will Control D again to add a subdivision level, and I will click Project All. And you should see this polypaint become even more crisp, and you should see the details become more crisp. Let ZBrush think about that. Your status bar is up here at the top of the screen where it shows its progress as it goes through projecting those mesh details and picking up that polypaint. In just a moment here, it should be finished, and you will see this all increase in fidelity. There we go. Now, if we switch between the two heads, there is little to no difference between them. This is a Dynamesh. If we go into frame mode, we can delete that now. We don't need it. So I'll click Delete, click OK. Now this is my ZRemesher mesh. If I press Shift D, I can step down my subdivision levels, and you see that we've actually got a lower subdivision level. If I step back up, we have higher subdivision levels that keep all of our sculpted detail and all of our polypaint. So this is a very, very powerful workflow. This allows you to be constantly bouncing back and forth between Dynamesh and subdivision modeling and back and forth. In my work as a designer, I'm using this constantly because I'll often still be refining the sculpture while a character is moving on down the pipeline. So I may need to bounce back into Dynamesh and make changes to it. If someone gives feedback, for example, I've had many times where a character is changing throughout the process of the film. So it's important that I can take my subdivision model, Dynamesh it again, make changes to it, and then bounce it back into a subdivision model. So let's see how we do that. I'm going to go ahead and Dynamesh this character again. I'm going to go to Geometry. I'm going to open up the Dynamesh menu. Now I am going to Dynamesh it at a high resolution. That's very important. I want to keep all of this detail, so I don't want to be anywhere lower than maybe 500, maybe even up to 1,000. It completely depends on how detailed this mesh is. So we'll leave it at about here, and I will Dynamesh. Now, do I want to freeze subdivision levels? Say no. So let's say that someone has come along or you've made the decision that you want to make a change to this character. So now I've Dynameshed it. If I go into frame mode, you can see it's in Dynamesh again. We've maintained our detail. Let's say that we need to add some horns on here. I'll turn on X symmetry and I'll just mask out the area where these horns will go. I'll make sure that my masking brush, I'm holding down the control key, my masking brush will be set to pen, and I'm just going to mask out that area. Then control click to invert that mask so it's unmasked there. Now with that area unmasked, I'm just going to go ahead and take the move brush, pressing the #1 hotkey. If you haven't watched the lesson on creating hotkeys, I recommend that you go ahead and take a look at that now. And let's just go ahead and create some kind of horns on this character. Let's go ahead and adjust these. Smooth this back. I'm just going to erase the mask here, going down the length of the horn so I can smooth this back, and then maybe take the inflate brush, hold down the Alt key, and just narrow that down a bit. Take the move brush, move those, and then go to B for brush, P for pinch, and I'll select the pinch brush. And I'll just use the pinch brush to pinch down the ends of those horns, smooth that back. Now they've gotten too thin, so I'll go to my inflate brush, inflate those a little bit again, and then clear my mask, and then execute Dynamesh. Now Dynamesh will take a little bit longer because we're working at a very high resolution, that 558, but not too terribly long. So I'll go back to our move brush, and then we can just finesse this bit. Go to our clay tubes brush, turn off the alpha, and we'll dial back the focal shift. Hold down the Alt key and just create a little bit of a few planes in these horns here. I'll go to my damn standard brush. We'll create some striations running the length of these horns just to give them a little bit of wear and tear, make them seem like they've got some detail on them. The important thing is that we're just making a big change to the model, and then we can bounce it back into a subdivision mesh shortly. And this is a neat trick that I like to do when I'm doing bone and rock. I'm going to mask out the area of the horn. I'm going to invert the mask so just the horn is unmasked. Make sure that we clean up around the edges here. Now I will go to Geometry. Under the Geometry menu, I'm going to go to Clay Polish. I'm going to turn up Sharp and R-Sharp, and I'm going to click the Clay Polish brush. And what that will do is it'll add some nice facets. You can see that that's sort of faceted those horns a bit, made them look quite nice. I'm going to click and drag over to the horn to select a base color for it. I'm going to go to the standard brush. I'm going to select just the dot alpha, the spray stroke. I'm going to set my spray stroke color slider to 0, and I'm going to turn on RGB on my brush and turn off ZAdd. And what this will do is it'll allow me to paint just color on here. Let's lighten that hue. Put a little bit of a lighter hue up here at the tip. I just want to give it a little bit of variation, that's all. And let's darken it quite a bit. And let's put some darker hues down here at the base of the horn. Just want to add a little bit of poly paint on there so we've got something. I'll go to the drag rectangle stroke. I'll select the vein alpha, and I'll select something a little bit bluish. And just click and drag. Oops, that's too strong. Let's turn our RGB intensity down. I just want to add some veining in those horns. Just add a little bit of color variation there. There we go. Turn up our RGB intensity just a tick, and then add some more veining here at the base. Now I'm going to control click on the background to invert my mask, and I'm going to go to the inflate brush, and I'm just going to inflate around the base of the horn a little bit. And what this is going to do, it's just going to give a little bit of an interface so it feels like that horn is entering into the head, that there's a point of attachment there where it's coming out of, say, the skull. Let's bring that out a little bit, invert that mask, and we can just tug that horn in. And that should be good. Clear the mask, and then execute Dynamesh. And that should clean that all up. And we've got a nice addition to our character. Now, how do we bounce this back into a subdivision model? Because we do not have any subdivision levels. We can't pose it. We can't do anything in terms of animation or exporting to other programs or creating displacement or texture maps. To do that, we go to the subtool menu. We duplicate our Z tool of the head, turn off visibility on the eyes and teeth, and then turn on solo, so we're only looking at one copy of the model. Go to geometry, go to ZRemesher. We'll leave it at 4,000 faces again and just ZRemesh the model. And once again, it'll take a little bit of time. We also, actually, I believe I've left my X symmetry on for this. So that would be a mistake because that will break this asymmetry that we created in the head here. So when this finishes, you'll be able to see the difference between the low res that we're creating with symmetry turned on and the low res that's created with symmetry turned off. And here we go. Now you can see this is our symmetrical mesh because X symmetry was turned on. And if I go back to the original model, you can actually see where the mesh that's being generated is breaking the asymmetry that we've deliberately created. If you look at areas like, say, in the forehead especially, we've got some asymmetry that we've deliberately put in here that is not really part of this low res. Now you could potentially project this and still pick that up, but it'll be far, far easier if we just undo, turn off our X symmetry, and then run ZRemesher again. So we'll go back to ZRemesh under geometry, and then ZRemesh it with X symmetry turned off.